Hi, everyone. I'm glad you're here because today's episode is a doozy. Today, I have three stories that nearly shattered everyone involved as they tried to rationalize what happened to them. Just wait until you hear what you're about to hear. So, if you're enjoying the channel, don't be invisible. Let us know you're out there and smash that subscribe button so we can always be together. Thanks. Now, let's get into the stories. I grew up in Montana, and I spent every moment I could outdoors in some way or another. My dad was a hunting guide in the area, and I followed in his footsteps. I've always felt at home in the backcountry. I had explored some of the most remote and wild areas of the United States, but then I took a job as a guide in Canada's Northwest Territory. The only way to get to some of these locations is by bush plane, and hunters pay you good money to take them on guided trips out there. It's some of the best hunting and fishing the world has to offer, but the land up there has its secrets, and the few who know about it want to keep it hidden. For that reason, I can't give the exact location of my story, but it's a place you'll probably never be able to go anyway. The valley is closed to hunting these days, and hikers can rarely afford to get there unless they pay a pilot. There aren't many local pilots who will even fly there anymore. Pilots can be a superstitious bunch, so they can get away with saying that the place is cursed, and nobody bats an eye. That's the story you'll hear if you ask around. The land is cursed. Best to stay away. But that's not the real story. Of course, I had heard all the tall tales of curses throughout my years working up there, but they were just that, tall tales. Campfire stories, if you will. A lot of them were from the gold rush times. Somebody found gold up there and likely made up the stories to keep other people away. Or at least, that's what I thought. I was taking a group on an elk hunt. We had just been dropped off by the pilot, and we were scheduled to be out there for 5 days. We had electric bear fences for our camp, so I wasn't too worried. There's always a danger when you're dropped off in a remote wilderness area inhabited by dangerous wildlife, but I made sure to take proper precautions. We set up our camp near a decently sized river. It was enough to provide us with fresh water, and there were elk tracks along the river's edge. Of course, it's not just elk that frequent easily accessible water sources, so we set up the bear fence around our camp to keep away any unwanted visitors. I remember that night hearing something moving around outside of our camp. I couldn't make out what it was at the time, but it was deterred by the fence, and it never made an attempt to enter. I had my gun ready just in case it was a bear. It had just rained there the day before, so the soil around the camp was soft. I figured I'd check the area for tracks in the morning to see who our visitor had been. Morning arrived, and I had more questions than answers. I found tracks around our camp, but they weren't anything I would have ever expected. They were human tracks. Barefoot human tracks. I figured maybe we had a sleepwalker, but I asked the group, and nobody claimed to have ever sleepwalked. Plus, no one among us had dirty feet, and these footprints were in the mud. That, and they were on the outside of the fence. I don't imagine anybody sleepwalking would have the wherewithal to open the gate without getting shocked, and there's no way anybody could sleep through that. And then I found more footprints by the river. There was definitely someone out there with us, but who? And why were they barefoot? I won't lie and say I didn't consider for a moment that Bigfoot might actually be real, but these tracks were the size of normal human feet. It was just somebody out there, living alone off the grid. Could that be? That was my best bet, but it didn't make me sleep any better that night. I know a few members of the hunting party wanted to leave right then and there, but the pilot wasn't scheduled to come and get us for another 4 days, and we had no way of contacting him. Whatever wild barefoot person invaded our camp that first night decided to leave us alone after that. We continued on with the hunt without incident. It wasn't until one of the hunters shot an elk that I figured out what was actually going on out there in the valley, and why the locals urged people to stay away. The elk was gut shot, and we had to track the thing through some pretty rough country. I could tell the hunters were getting tired, but I didn't want to leave a wounded animal without doing everything in my power to recover it. We chose a rendezvous site at the river, and I went on alone. I tracked the elk through the forest and into a clearing on the other side. I then saw the elk laying dead on the ground, but it wasn't alone. There were 3 people standing over it. I'm not quite sure how to describe them. They were definitely human. They weren't like a Bigfoot or anything. They were people. They all three turned to look at me when I came over the hill, and one of them had a stone knife in its hand. But they didn't try to attack me with it. They looked like they were about to start quartering the dead elk. They were shorter than average, and their skin was tan and weathered. I hesitate to call them cavemen, but that's what they looked like. They had primitive clothing made from what looked like leather. Maybe they were some uncontacted, isolated tribe. I don't rightly know. What I do know is that the three of them were skinny and they looked like they needed that elk more than we did. I backed away from them before turning around and heading back through the forest. I decided not to tell anybody about my experience for years. I told the hunters that I lost the elk, and that was that. I realized then that the locals know about these people. They know that they live out there in the wilderness, and they try to leave them in peace as best they can. All those stories about that place were meant to scare people away, but it wasn't for the reasons I had previously thought. Like many of the others who used to guide out there, I stopped running guided hunts well before the area was closed. Every once in a while, hikers still go out into the valley, but they're few and far between, and the people who live out there seem to avoid them at all costs. I've been an officer in the Hamilton Township Police Department in New Jersey for the past 10 years. It's been a good career. Nothing big. Lots of the normal stuff. Handling burglaries, larceny, auto thefts. You know, the normal stuff. But I'm writing to you now because some things have been happening that definitely aren't normal. It started with this one call. It was an altercation in Hamilton Veterans Park. My partner and I were already close, so we responded. Upon arrival, we discovered that the disturbance was ongoing. We could see exactly what was going on. Just looking at this was beyond weird. I mean, Hamilton Veterans Park is a family park. It's quiet. It's taken care of. There are even historical monuments to both 9/11 and the Revolutionary War. Nothing like this happens there. Suspects had been described as juvenile males. That wasn't true. There was only one kid harassing a single adult male. He couldn't have been more than 12. And though he wasn't a small kid, he was definitely smaller than the man whose face he was getting in. He was literally going up to this man who clearly wanted nothing to do with him and getting in his face, waving his hands, making agitated comments. He seemed like he was legitimately picking a fight with somebody who could knock him down pretty easily. Now, I have to give the guy credit because while he very clearly looked irritated, he wasn't pushing or shoving or defending himself from this kid at all. He wasn't looking at him. He wasn't making eye contact with him. He was just talking on his phone. I found out later that he was trying to get in touch with the boy's parents or somebody in authority to take care of this kid. To be honest, my first thought was, is this kid on drugs? Maybe that wasn't fair, but it was the only thing that made sense. The way the kid was acting didn't make sense. But it gets weirder. As my partner and I hustled up there and started to try to defuse the situation, this kid takes one look at us in our uniforms, turns around, screams in the man's face, and then attacks him. I mean, full-on lunges at him, hands flying. The man defended himself, obviously. He didn't do anything more than push the kid away so he couldn't get hit. Some of the people who were standing around started yelling about child abuse. It was very clear to my partner and me that there was no abuse going on, just one weirdly out-of-control kid. We broke up the fight, checked on the boy, who was weirdly quiet and relatively unharmed except for some abrasions to his hands and knees when he fell. End of day, end of report. Didn't think anything else of it, until it happened again. The next time we got a call about a public altercation between an adult and a teenager. It was at the same park, same general time, but with a different boy and a different man. The rest of the encounter was the same too. An overly aggressive child trying to antagonize an adult, and the adult trying their level best not to engage. This time we got there before any altercations really took place. We were able to defuse the situation, filed the report, didn't think anything else of it. A couple of weeks went by without any unusual incidents, and so we thought, okay, we're in the clear. I mean, it's weird to consider a small disturbance outside the ordinary, but honestly, we weren't used to weird pre-teens trying to attack adults with both incidents happening in the same place. 2 weeks later, another disturbance, another problem. It was weird. I don't mind telling you that at this point I was seriously considering, I don't know, carrying holy water with me or something, just because this was all too odd. We got there before the kid homed in on an adult male and started attacking him. And this time, I got a good look at the kid's eyes. They weren't right. Now I've seen people strung out on drugs. It's an unfortunate part of my profession. But this did not look like anything I recognized. In fact, the kid had a flat, glassy stare. It was like the lights were on, but nobody was home. He was completely unresponsive to us until he saw someone who caught his attention for whatever reason, and then he went ballistic. The higher-ups started to worry about a drug problem in the park. It's a big place with plenty of tree cover, hiking trails, and several entrances. The department started putting more of a police presence there, and we caught a few people trading things that they shouldn't have, but nothing that they had on them would explain the strange behavior of those two boys. After we beefed up the patrols in the park, things were quiet for another 2 weeks. And then almost exactly at that 14-day mark, another disturbance, another call, and another kid. This one was muttering something under his breath. I couldn't make out what he was saying. It sounded like gibberish. My partner's Filipino, and he said it didn't sound like any language he knew either. I started thinking hard about texting my grandmother and asking her to pray for me. Up until this point, the department was trying to keep the weirder aspects of the case quiet so as not to spook anyone. But like most bad information, word gets out. People stopped letting their kids go to the park, particularly because of the worry of drugs and partially because nobody wanted to let their child get involved in a fight. And that seemed to work for 2 weeks. This call was different, though. It wasn't during a time when the park was even open. But someone called to say that they saw a lot of weird lights over Hamilton Veterans Park. They thought that someone might have been having an illegal party, or kids might be playing in the park after closing. I'd been trying to avoid the freaky stuff going on in the park by changing my schedule to the graveyard shift. So it was ironic that I was on duty when this call came in. I headed over. I pulled up to the park with lights on but no sirens. As far as I officially knew, it was just a noise complaint. No reason to rouse the neighborhood. When my partner and I got there, I saw the lights the report had been talking about. It almost looked like somebody was having an open-air rave. As far as we knew, no one had a permit for that, and one wouldn't have been granted anyway. My first thought was that the caller was right. It was an underground party. I wouldn't have put it past anyone to sneak in to use the park as a location for a YouTube video. But there was something about the way the colors of the lights looked, like there was a color that I couldn't see on top of the color that I could. The strobe pattern didn't seem to be in a rhythm that matched anything I had ever seen, even at a concert. I couldn't hear any music, but there was a sound. It was this almost subsonic hum. I could feel it vibrating in my bones. The lights were coming from the trees past the kids' playground, and the closer we got to the tree line, the worse my gut tightened. That hum was getting to me. I glanced at my partner. He looked calm, which helped me hold it together, until we got into the trees. The lights strobing through the pines made it hard to navigate. It was hard to tell which shadows were actual objects and which weren't. I guess we were lucky that we didn't faceplant into a tree trunk as we moved. The light kept getting stronger the further into the trees we went. It sounds crazy, but it felt like I was getting a sunburn from it, even though it was past 10 o'clock at night. And then we passed the tree line, and we got to what looked like a small clearing. I say it looked like because I could barely see a thing. Not because it was dark. It was too bright. All I knew was that the hum felt like it was going through my bones. I remember lowering my weapon because I couldn't see much. I thought my partner was still next to me, but again, hard to see. I squinted hard and I could make out a dark blob floating in midair. It was about 4 feet long and flat. I remember thinking, what the hell? And then I heard my partner shout, "Police!" And that's when the light dimmed a bit. It was enough to let me see what was going on. That blob that I saw, it was a body. What I could make out made me think it was a kid. No, more than one. They were floating like they were in some magician's act. My head started racing. I looked around for anything that could explain this, but all I saw was those lights and that kid. I tried to call in to dispatch, but all my radio did was spit static. At that point, I guess I decided that it didn't matter what I thought was going on. Those kids looked like they were in danger. We had to do something. I shouted, "Let's go," to my partner, and I started to rush in. And that's when I saw it. Them. I don't know. There were other figures in the light. I didn't know what they were, but I knew they weren't the kids we were trying to rescue. I think there were 5 of them. I couldn't tell, because that light got real bright and the hum got louder and louder. I'd tell you what happened next, but I don't know. What I do know is that I woke up face down on the forest floor with my nose full of pine needles. My partner was next to me, and so were the kids that I thought I'd seen. My radio worked when I tried calling dispatch. To this day, my partner and I don't talk about what happened. We don't have any real explanation. We filled out the incident report as investigating noise complaint, broke up underground rave, and we just stopped talking about it. The kids were brought home, no charges were filed for their apparent trespassing. I kept an eye open for more of that weird, aggressive behavior, and it happened just one time. After that, things went back to normal, except for me and my partner. I don't know that we will ever really be normal again.